Welcome. I'm Harmony Slater, your host of the Finding Harmony podcast. Over the past 20 years, I've taught thousands of yoga teachers and students to explore the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern everyday life, using mind-body practices to heal, awaken, and manifest their dreams from the inside out. This podcast is a sanctuary for those feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges. Are you ready to jump in and discover how these challenges aren't actually in the way, but are the way to finding harmony? Let's invite the magic back in. Hello and welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. This week, we are going into part 2 of this long conversation with Tom Norrington Davies, who we love because, as you know, he is a cook and a writer. He writes a monthly column called A Man for All Seasons in Delicious magazine. He's also a regular contributor to the food pages of The Guardian and writes on a freelance basis for many publications, including Style magazine, The Sunday Times, and The Daily Telegraph. And he's also guested on Radio 4's The Food Program and A Good Food Life. He is our connection to all things in the world of cooking. He's our closest connection to Gordon Ramsay and to just the world of food in general, as well as combining that with a love for Ashtanga Yoga. We're going into his experience today, this week, with more yoga talk for you and how he finds the connection in both yoga and food to be quite similar. So I cannot wait to jump into part 2 of this interview with Tom Norrington Davies. I know you're going to love it. If you didn't listen to part 1, head back over to last week's episode and listen to part 1 first, so that you can get a full scope as we just jump right into part 2 with Tom. Bon appetit. Hi, welcome back to the Finding Harmony podcast. I am still here today with Russell Case and Tom Norrington Davies.
We were going to chat about the Ashtanga.
The Ashtanga. But first, where we left off last time, we were talking about food and seasons, and also like the wellness industry, and how a lot of things are being sold, I think, as wellness, but also like food items as healthy. I think that's kind of what you were getting at, right?
What do you all mean by this? Like, how is wellness healthy? Like the industrialization of food? What's going on?
It's what is being referred to now a lot as ultra-processed food. And that is food that has basically been produced with items that you wouldn't normally find in a... if you open your cupboard and you can't find the ingredients that are in your sort of processed meal, whether that is a really, whether... I think a lot of people immediately assume that it'll be, like pot noodle or a microwavable pizza or worse than that, And
is there worse than that?
It's food that's sort of impersonating
health
food, yeah.
Like our protein, like our vegetable protein smoothies and our protein bars and our...
I'd say probably if there's one market that's probably been most vulnerable to the sort of the ultra processization of food is probably the plant-based or vegan stuff. Suddenly like there's this shift from when I was younger. Veganism was really clearly defined by being an ethical choice. It was a sort of spiritual and morality thing, and about the non-harm. It was an ahimsa. It's a part of the ahimsa canon, and the non-exploitation of animals. But of course,
It,
here in the
and
UK,
almost be done by a punk living in a squat would then also be vegan.
yeah, absolutely.
The three would go together.
Yes.
Or the Seventh-day Adventist.
But
You gotta be
in
careful
England,
with,
yeah.
Be careful with the vegan jokes, because someone will come and get you.
They will come and get you. Yeah.
But now, I mean, so much of the food that is like vegan food or plant-based food is heavily processed, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
we love Beyond Meat burgers, but I've been told by my functional medicine doctor that they're like the worst thing for me.
Absolutely. What's happened is, I think at some point in the last decade, in particular, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, the first thing that sort of happened was that the word veganism has been surgically removed from a lot of it, and it's plant-based.
Right.
So that implies that it's about health as much as about ethics. And climate change has got a little bit sort of caught up in it, so you might not be so bothered about the animals, but you might be bothered about the climate, and actually climate change can be reversed if we all stop eating cows and yada yada yada. I mean, it's so complex, it's so hard to unpick. But into this sort of mess has fallen all this stuff, and it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff that's making the kids in school so overweight and stunted growth. This ultra processed food, and it's so easy again. If luckily for us in our kind of, I suppose, our privileged world, you could say, where we've been given the confidence and the education to understand the difference between these things. Say you've been living on sausages and you decide you're going to go vegan, and someone says, well, hey, look, here's this, you can still have a sausage, and by the way, it's better for you because it's a plant-based sausage. But this is still an ultra-processed food. I'd argue, I'm not an expert on this by any stretch, but I'd argue probably there are healthier meaty sausages out there than vegan sausages. And I'm not saying, I mean, I can do a plant-based sausage. I've got a strange fondness for them. That's why I plucked them out as an example. I don't really do the burgers, but I can do, I love a vegan sausage.
Yeah, we have a strange fondness for plant-based sausages also.
Yeah, vegan sausages and mash. It's just one of those things. It's kind of
that was a big deal for us. Like a Linda McCartney Lincolnshire sausage was quite a delicacy.
But would now seem quite primitive as well, because I mean, Linda McCartney's stuff, I think, was sort of, they were more like beanie kind of.
Yeah, we're beanie.
Yeah, and
not
now
pea protein.
Now they're not this sort of textured pea protein that just feels like actual sausage.
Yeah.
And I mean,
well, my functional medicine doctor would agree fully with you. He is very, very against any of this processed vegan food. He says it's terrible for your cellular health.
Yes, I would agree. But probably not if it's the occasional treat.
Right. Yeah.
Again, it's never had too helpful to go extreme on these things, is it? Just to say, I can never eat this stuff again. I would argue that one is probably safer if they assume that a plant-based sausage should be as much of an occasional treat as a meaty sausage.
Right.
Because
like,
you don't want to be
eat it
living on
every
those
day.
either. They are not,
No.
they're not the greatest.
No, not healthy either.
I would just mention that the producers of the program do have stock in Beyond Meat. And just to make sure that our public understands.
That we do support Beyond Meat, beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Oh, no, it's all fantastic stuff. But again, you're not meant to live on it, are you?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? Is we kind of get caught up in the convenience, and then we're living off of, highly processed, edibles that taste good.
You can make a strong argument that we're not meant to live It's very much it's us against the universe
No,
trying to stay alive.
that's you.
The universe is, as I will quote Richard Freeman, a giant death machine, and we're just doing our best
Yeah.
to stay alive.
Yes, yeah. Most of the things in the universe
Okay.
are already dead, aren't they? And on the planet.
Well, and we are
Or
in a
trying to
slow
kill us.
process of decay.
Yes.
Which brings me to the Ashtanga Yoga community.
I only noticed this.
How-
Go on.
Yeah. No, you go.
Well, I noticed this. I became slightly preoccupied with it, partly because of, obviously, just to recap on part one. Obviously, I listened with absolute. I was in raptures over Amy's episode, partly
Oh, Amy
because
Echo,
she just spoke so passionately and from the heart about disordered eating and practice and that. And I almost came from the sort of total opposite experience.
Right.
I should say that I put it down at the time to my age, I suppose, and my work life. And I'm going in and out of the shala by a few months in on a daily basis and absolutely loving it. But my practice was, it wasn't pretty. I was a stiff bloke, stiff, anxious bloke. Absolutely loving it and feeling all these incredible effects.
Yeah.
And it's really important to remember that I'm a shift worker, and what's more, the buck stops with me, so I've got little or no control over that rota at all. Someone goes sick, I'm not leaving. All that kind of thing. It's not a complaint. I loved every moment of it. But I was so unable to control so many aspects of my life, and yet I'm palpably aware that this practice is doing something quite profound to my body and my mind. It is changing me. My core is getting stronger. I am drastically more flexible, even though I'm aware that that's not the aim by now. I'm aware that really it's what's happening up here and here that's where it's really the magic is really taking hold. But and especially as I get to the point where I take my first visit to Mysore, I am aware that there are a lot of people having the experiences that, like the kind that Amy talked about.
Right, of trying to control the food, and
Yes.
control the sleep, and control everything basically in their life so that they can have this dream practice every day that
addicted to restriction.
addicted to restriction.
And I mean, it was funny, quite a lot of the time I felt like I was almost on a different planet to a lot of people practicing around me. The other thing was that even part of this was because I suppose with a chef's life, it is creative, and it's a wonderful thing, that creative process with food to be in every day. But there is at the heart of it a desire for approval, and a need to have good reviews, and happy customers.
Yeah.
So you are in achievement mode all the time. I think one of my
100%.
reasons for my ecstatic response to practice was that I had these are the things that I would say to people at the time if they asked me. I've never been so awful at anything in my life as this yoga thing. I'm so clumsy, so uncoordinated, so stiff. I feel like the biggest oaf in the room, but I'm so happy, and I can't wait to get back in the room.
Whoa.
That's
And this
amazing,
continues
yeah.
as well.
That's
I got
fabulous.
to, and also I loved that there was this. It was maybe the first time since I'd been very, very young that I was doing something that had no element of achievement at all to it. It totally didn't seem to matter how unedifying my practice was, or no one seemed to mind. No one seemed to be saying, you really need your Marichasana D needs work, or when are you going to learn to stand up from a back bend, or that kind of. I just don't remember any sort of pressure on me. And then I got to Mysore, and I mean, Sharat seemed to find me hilarious. I just remember getting laughed at a lot. It was sort of ha ha ha, no running as I'd try and come up from those back bends, or ha ha ha,
Oh,
no
the
falling.
running, yeah.
You know,
No
I
falling.
just took it as, it seemed very good natured to me. It didn't seem like
Yeah.
an admonition, you know.
Yeah.
And yet,
Yeah. He's very. I think his personality is very sweet, especially with beginning students.
Not my experience, but I just want to know what.
It didn't matter how much he liked. I was also terrified. I mean, I figured that there was something quite sort of stern as much as there was funny about him. But I would probably have said the same about Hamish at the time. You know, I think again it was such a big deal to me by now.
Yeah.
So everything about it seemed a bit larger than life. You know, the laughter, the sternness.
I can't quite understand how you would go from that stiff, oafish bloke to authorized. That seems like such a titanic leap, like a veritable Hanuman.
Like a big journey.
Yeah, jumping across the straits with Sri Lanka in full splits. Like, how do you do a jump like that?
I mean, I've been going. I started going there in 2010. I was authorized in 2013, and I was very surprised. Actually, no one was more surprised than me. When he suggested it, I did say to him,
He's like, Tom.
I said, you know what? You do know what I do for a living, do you? You know, I'll never be. I thought he might be pissed off if I sort of didn't go off and become a teacher. So I sort of said, you know, I have this restaurant, and I was assisting Hamish and Roberta at the shop.
Yeah.
But as far as I was concerned, that was how it would stay, and I loved doing that.
Yeah.
To cut long story short, I had this very talented chef. The reason I'd gone to Mysore in the first place had this beautiful, talented chef, Sam, who I either would give him my job. We also had this amazing manager, Anna, and if we didn't give her Rob's job, Rob was the sort of front of house half of the equation. I was the back of house kitchen. We needed to give our jobs away. Otherwise, they'd get pinched by someone else, because that's the game. And he was starting a family, so it wasn't the best time to go looking for project number 2. And I think I just thought, so if I take some time off, maybe I should study again or something. And then I'd realize I am studying, aren't I? I mean,
you are studying.
I'm at Yoga Hogwarts up at Euston in this funny. Why don't I go and try it at the source? So, and a lovely thing about Mysore was, and again another big surprise to me when I got there, because I had no idea what really to imagine. Again, it's funny to think that in 2010 I still applied by that letter. You know, you sent that letter off, and if they didn't reply back, you could go.
Yeah.
You just have to go home.
Yeah.
You'd get the Ord study with Saraswati is what people did. Yeah.
So I was really blown away to get there and find, this is another city, Charlotte. This isn't a million miles away from what I've been doing all this time. I've got to get my own apartment and go to the Charlotte in the mornings. And that struck me as fantastic, the everydayness of it. Again, sometimes I would think, I've fallen into a wormhole or something. I'm in a different place to everyone else. This all seems quite straightforward and and
you
simple.
do then start to build a day of what are you going to do after 6 a.m. because your day is done. And you've got 12 hours to kill before you can go to sleep, because you can't reasonably go to sleep at 5. But you should 6 to 7. It's like, it's time for bed. So what are you going to do for 12
for
hours?
Me, this
is
was
a real question.
I'm going to eat everything on the menu at Hotel Durga Burman and Anu's and everywhere in Mysore that I can possibly go and
Das Prakash, Hotel Das Prakash.
Oh, yes,
get a coffee, ice cream.
Yes. Fantastic.
Oh yeah.
How did you find the food there? Was it like something you never tasted before, because it's like from Indian food?
But he'd been having cousers every Sunday.
I know, but it tastes different when it's
the food in the
India.
south is very different. I mean, Majid Jaffrey's cooking was although she later on did
North.
She did books about regional cookery but I mean, she is originally from Delhi, so the first book is quite a northern book, and
Yeah.
we do have southern Indian food in London, but you got to know where to go and find it. It's not ubiquitous like what the Brits call a curry house is by and large Bangladeshi uh, food, Bengali
Yeah.
food, and
Pakistani food, yeah.
Pakistani food. It's one of those strange things that everyone calls it Indian food when, I mean, they're talking about the Indian subcontinent. But tandoori
Yeah.
houses, curry houses, balti houses, those are very much from the north. So
Try and get a dosa from there.
yeah, absolutely.
Laugh you out of the house.
The food of the south. I mean, I had it. For me, it reminded me more of my travels in Southeast Asia. I recognised a lot of it from sort of Singapore and Malaysia. Um, I've
Really?
found that it's for me. It suits me. It's got all the kind of things I love. It's got that. Well, I'm a sucker for anything kind of brothy and soupy. I've always loved soups.
A sambar, for
Yeah,
example.
so I love all the
Yeah.
sambar, rasam, and dals, and I also really love I love something about dosa. Sort of spoke to me about sourdough breads and that idea of the
Yeah.
batter being fermented overnight.
The fermentation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It felt like my kind of food. So I've
Yeah.
always really, really enjoyed it. I feel very at home there.
When I first
Culinarily.
went to India, I was a vegan raw foodist.
Oh, wow.
And it was explained to me by a Jyotish that I should eat cooked food. And I said, I just want to.
To
it was
control
a-
your vata.
you know,
isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And there's the whole set of things that he was telling me, but that one thing really stood out to me. I was like, am I supposed to cook food now? And it's like, oh yes, because of worms.
Yeah. Also the worms.
Well, all right. Well, we don't have worms back home,
The
but okay.
parasites.
We do
It's
have
important to cook the food in India.
It's important to cook the food.
Yeah.
We definitely had worms
So-
back home. I was my school
Really?
days. I can remember we were wormed, much like your lovely Artemis and
Oh.
Apollo. We were sort of lined up and given
Oh,
this
you were dewormed like my dogs
disgusting
were
medicine
dewormed.
once every term. It was meant to. They
Oh,
just tried to
my.
disguise it in a sort of strawberry flavored gunk, but it was absolutely revolting.
In England,
It was like we might as well have been sheep dipped. Yeah.
the government had a policy of deworming the students, is what you're trying to tell me.
Yes.
Whew, okay. God.
Oh my god.
Because we were
That's
so
not something we
revolting.
do in the States.
No, we
No,
don't.
we don't deworm the students here. No.
So did you notice anything else? Like getting to Mysore, it's different when you're practicing in India versus back at home. It kind of, it's going to draw sort of the most intense, most dedicated, most fully committed practitioners in a sense, right? Because you have to take at least a month, if not more, off of your job, your family, leave everything at home to go on vacation to practice yoga. And at the same time, I mean, when we started going, I guess in 2010, it might have been a little bit different, but, it was still pretty like, there was a lot of hippies, a lot of punks, a lot of like people into kind of alternative things, kind of extreme, but also like super high achieving. I mean, I think people that practice Ashtanga yoga for the most part are like super A-type personalities.
Yeah, you can achieve in the arts, you can achieve in finance, and those are the people that were coming.
Yeah,
Yes,
whether
sure.
they're
Yeah.
artists or whether they're lawyers or whether they're chefs,
And
right?
the people in finance are always buying lunch, which is nice.
yeah, or finance. There's an aspect of the personality, I think, that is drawn to Ashtanga that loves competition, that loves achievement, that loves being able to check boxes and say, I did it, and get gold stars that
Yep.
say, I'm good enough.
I got a posture.
And like you were saying with cooking, right, where there's a bit of
There's a parallel.
a bit of a pattern of needing that external validation of like, you want the good review. You want people to enjoy your food and like your food. And there's an element of feeling successful when you get that good review.
Yes.
And when you get that feedback, like, okay, I'm doing good. Did you notice some similarities between the people who are kind of gathered in Mysore looking for that feedback from Sharat, say, or,
Oh, absolutely,
you know,
yes. And also
Yeah.
the raggle-taggleness of it, the huge sort of the diverse, like you say, there's it's a place with fantastic amount of kind of misfits. There was a lot.
Yeah.
I think I think you've really hit on something. A lot about the practice resonated with me in the beginning, because although, of course, it was completely outside of my experience of anything I'd experienced before, a lot about it felt strangely familiar.
Right.
One of the reasons I think that that it helped with my anxiety so much and began to work for me or on me quite quickly was that I think it's probably maybe a mildly ADHD thing. I think a lot of chefs are probably somewhere, if there is an ADHD spectrum, like other kinds of neurodiversity, I think a lot of us who cook are on that spectrum. That idea of
But with OCD coupled together.
Oh, absolutely,
You
yeah.
do both together.
I mean, just put
Yeah.
it all in and make a great big soup out of all those things with D on the end.
letters, alphabet soup, and then
I think that you're doing activities that to the outside observer might seem quite mechanical and repetitive. Whether that's cooking recipes, doing a line service in a restaurant, or doing Surya Namaskar and then the standing sequence in whichever series on a daily basis.
Yeah, the same.
It looks.
Yeah, the same postures every day.
It looks mechanical, and to a certain extent it is, and it's based on repetition. I always say, actually, vinyasa are kind of like the recipes for the asanas. A lot about it looked. There was even though all the terminology was new in
the
Sanskrit,
components.
the concepts were things that seemed quite kind of familiar to my body, and my head, and it's one of the reasons I began to be. I went through a slightly awkward, quite evangelistic phase where I just thought everyone at work should be doing it, and I'd be telling them so. And people started eye rolling.
That's normal, though. That's a normal piece of
yes,
it.
It's true.
But
because you're experiencing such profound benefits that you want to share it, right? It's automatic. You want to share it with
you're
people.
Sure that everyone will benefit.
And also, I'd come across it by accident, and so I wanted. I thought, well, not everyone's going to be that lucky. Not everyone's going to have that lovely teacher hand them the bit of paper with Hamish's number on it or whatever.
Right.
So I thought, my swap dharma is now to share this with the great and good of British catering. And most of them would just be like, oh, he's off again. Here he goes. Here he goes. Next, he's going to say, and you've got to learn to stand up properly, everybody.
Yeah. Pull in your banda.
Yeah. But the thing was, what was really important, I think, and where I suppose, I think I felt just really lucky. Something about the incredibly straightforward way in which it had been presented to me, and the fact that it did seem to be working, despite the fact that I would look across the Shala, whether it be in Drummond Street or in Gokulam, and think, okay, there's obviously a very adept way of doing this, and that's not me. That didn't really seem to matter, because no one was telling me I had to be like that person. I just assumed those people around me had maybe been doing it longer.
Right.
It seemed to me that it was fine that it was a slow burn, 2 or 3 years in, and I'm still learning the primary series. And I was like, okay, these are long-term projects, but I'm used to long-term projects because I can leave a stock pot cooking for hours or days on end, or have a ferment going in a fridge, or make compost on my allotment. All those concepts seemed fairly normal to me. But the main thing was that achievement just seemed to be neither here nor there, because the phrase that I would say again and again and again to myself was, this is this practice is meds. I mean, I used to say and it's take one a day. I'm on these meds because if I keep taking these meds, and I should say the panic attacks have gone. They seem to be history. I hadn't had one. Well, I haven't had one for a long, long time. And if I feel like even inkling of one coming on, I now have, a coping mechanism. But largely, I felt that this was like prophylactic. Whatever it is doing, the most important thing that it's doing is that it's rewiring my fidgety, anxious little head.
Well,
I have to say that in Mysore, it did not work as a prophylactic for me, and I did end up with an STD that I didn't want. I would just like to, as a commentary on what you're saying, is how gorgeous it's, and I can see why Sharat took to you, is that you really truly were experiencing the fruits of the practice, and you were taking a measure of wisdom to the practice that is really quite accomplished. And regardless of what it looked like, what I'm hearing it sounds quite advanced.
Oh,
expert. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I love that you say it was your medicine and it was like taking meds, because it reminds me, Patabi Joyce used to say frequently, yoga's mind medicine.
Yeah.
And that's how he would describe it. It's mind medicine. And I think when we're focused on how yoga is changing our mind, changing our nervous system, we approach it in a very different way than when we're just focused on kind of our body and the postures and, achievement and how we look and if we can do them, right? And if we can grab our heels or our ankles or our knees or whatever, touch our toes, whatever your level or standard of your goal is, I guess, or maybe what your teacher's goal is for you. I mean, that can also play into it. I think then we kind of get confused about the whole point of yoga, which is really about it being mind medicine, as you say, and experiencing the benefits on a cellular level, on a neurological level of the practice.
I once remember,
and it doesn't matter what the postures look like, and it doesn't matter what series you're doing, and it doesn't matter, none of that stuff actually matters.
I once remember hearing a beautiful interview with David Swenson where he said that. He said, you've got to remember that, all the asanas really, they're like kind of toys to distract you. They kind of, they keep you preoccupied. Whereas, and what he was saying unequivocally was that, the real magic is the Chistana, really. If you in terms of asana, but that's not a very exciting thing to talk about. But of course, if you can, so you give people all these kind of complex things to do, but actually in them, sometimes when it's so complicated, actually the only way through it is Chistana, isn't it? I was
it's interesting. I was going to say, you reminded me, it's one of the reasons why I've never, I can teach a lot of alignment and tips and tricks and give you drills. I can do that, but it's never been something that I love doing. It's not something that is gets me oh, great, I get to teach a whole workshop on back bending. I love teaching about back bending, because for me, that's not really what yoga is. And I think this emphasis on alignment and achievement and do your drills and do your handstands and handstand challenges and tips and tricks and all of this is so off the point of what yoga actually is, which is the relationship you're having with yourself, the relationship you're having with higher consciousness, the relationship you're having with your nervous system, how you're regulating, how you're breathing, how you're experiencing life. Let's talk about the bigger picture, right?
Of course.
Who gives a shit if you can stand on your hands?
That's what I'm saying about Tom, is that I think is that being stiff, it really is.
Yeah, it helps.
It's a blessing.
Possibly is.
It's a blessing. And Patabi Joyce would say that, blessed stiff. Richard Freeman would say the same thing, blessed with stiffness.
Right.
Because you do immediately encounter yoga.
Yes, it touches the
rather than
sides.
having to take, rather than taking, because rather than taking 20 years to find a posture where you actually feel something.
Yeah.
You feel it right away.
Oh, goodness, yeah. I think and you hit the nail on the head. It's so much the individual journey. You can't really
Yeah.
ultimately put something defined and say, right, this is your yoga practice. It's got to be like this, otherwise it's this way or the highway, because everybody is experiencing it slightly differently. That's why I did find that the more I was really taken by the sort of almost lack of information about it. And really, really simple concept. I mean, it's Tristana to this day, I think, is the most beautiful thing about the asana practice in our lineage, for want of another word,
Whoa.
because it's just such a
breathing.
and it's
focus.
a beautiful set of foundations rather than a great long list of techniques, isn't it? Tristana is this. It's You take one leg off the tripod and it just won't stand up. It needs the three. It's like a base,
Yeah.
but it's not. It doesn't get all caught up in, And here's how to achieve Tristana in Trikonasana B. Actually, it's just breathe this way. Look at your hand. It's such simple advice, and it.
Is
Funnily enough,
can you say the oh, I'm sorry. Would you be able to say that, like, Le Cordon Bleu does it have a foundation like that, or is it just a series of French techniques like brunoising and salad?
This is not an answer to that question necessarily, because I'm not an experienced cordon bleu chef. But like stock, the French word for stock is fond, which is fond, which is our word for foundation.
Foundation, right?
I was thinking that. So, I with funnily, the just to bring it back to the practice and food, because this is going to be a long way of answering your question. One of the things that I got most curious about, partly because of all the effect on the digestive system and stuff, and I'd started to notice, and then I read Yoga Mala, and I'm realizing that a lot of this squishing and squashing is obviously meant to be doing that. And so then obviously the next step for me is that I'm going in search of more understanding about, so what is everybody, what's the diet? Is there a diet to go with this? Is there a food aspect to this? And I'm pretty sure that, because if I'm quiet and self-conscious about anything in my life, it's probably this rather strange dual world I'm inhabiting. One where my restaurant is about pure hedonism. It's like, yes, have dessert, of course have wine, eat yourself silly, you're going to have a fun evening. It was to give people a good time. Obviously a good time without it costing the earth, no pun intended. I mean, we're trying to be green and sustainable and all those things, but ultimately it's fun eating. And I'm thinking, so there's got to be serious yoga eating that I should really be doing my homework on. And then of course, if you get into texts like the Bhagavad Gita, and it's like, don't eat too much or too little. It's like, well, Krishna, could we have a bit more in the way of specifics? What's too much? What's too little? Is that 5 a day? Is it, and then or the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, all that weird list of ingredients that you just shouldn't be eating.
And they say don't eat too many vegetables.
Don't eat too many vegetables. I know. I was thinking again, the most profound advice. I mean, ironically, that the Bhagavad Gita advice is absolutely beautiful, because
like with the sattvic and rajas and tamasic food.
Yeah, well, no, or just not too much, not too little.
Oh, and not too much.
And now how I mean, we respond to food in such an individual way. Now that they're beginning to understand more and more about the microbiome, I mean, even identical twins might respond to different foodstuffs in different ways. And the closest I've ever come to, that's to me, the discovery of the microbiome is the closest Western science has come yet to understanding the things they've been talking about in Ayurveda for centuries. About you get that diet and suggestions for how to live based on your prakriti, on your doshas. And that from Krishna saying to Arjuna, not too much, not too little. You got the Michael Pollan quote. I think it's one of the most sort of quoted modern things, like eat food, not too much, mostly plants. It's really beautiful.
I love that. Yeah.
Because of all these insanely confusing messages. And then that it was a strange time back then, because I felt I had this enormous wealth of understanding about food, but I felt painfully self-conscious about it, and maybe even a bit closeted, because I thought my food is my cooking and my philosophy about food is probably far from yoga. But then at the same time, I'm looking around me, and as I'm getting to know lots of wonderful, wonderful people, I see them really struggling with
Right.
with food.
Yeah.
I see them being given very mixed messages about what's good for you and what's, worst of all, what's bad for you, or what's clean eating. When that started to become a thing, it's like, oh, if there's clean eating, there's got to be, if there's clean food, there's got to be dirty food. And then the insane amounts of orthorexia that we see now, and so much of that in cultures like ours, where if you're if because all you want is answers, isn't it? All you want is to be definitively told how to live right. Sadly, I think that there is no one size fits all answer for that, but there's a lot of people out there marketing those one size fits all answers with their keto, paleo, rainbow, raw diets, and they're all so unlikely to work for everybody.
Yeah.
With truffle oil, those diets will work.
Do you like truffle oil?
No.
No, we kind of do have a fondness for
we
it.
like truffle. We know that it's shit.
But we recognize that it's probably not good.
Shit. It's not a real fucking truffle shaved onto your fucking niçoise.
Oh, but it tastes like truffle, yeah. I'm not that keen. I'm not that keen on it. I find it too strong for me.
Too strong.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my palate's
it can be for sure.
I'm not a big fan of big in-your-face flavors. Actually,
Flavors. Oh, right.
Not a huge fan
if
of
I'm
blue
not being
cheeses.
Punched in the nuts. If I'm not being punched in the nuts by a Stilton or 15 million Scoville, I can't even taste it. I eat a whole bulb of garlic a day because I can't taste it.
Oh, really?
I'm fucked.
No, you can taste it.
Barely.
You just like that super pungent taste.
I want to be punched in the face. Speaking of being punched in the face, could you tell us, how did Sherratt end up in the House of Parliament?
Oh, yes. So fast forward a few years, and I when I came back to London after the trip where he authorised me, I did end up starting to do a bit of teaching, and I fell into this lovely pattern where I'm able to take a backstage role at the restaurant, and I'm off the rota, but I'm there as a support for Sam and Anna, our lovely now head chef and manager, who are running the show and doing this amazing job. And so in London, I can go off and be, teaching Mysore. I can do that early in the morning, so I can be available to them in the day if they need me. Did go through a slightly intense phase where I was teaching Lynn Pinetti's program, as was before she and Anne and Damien all went to Brussels. And then helping Hamish and Roe at AYL, assisting.
Did you say Lynn Pinetti?
Yeah.
Is it not Lynn Pinette?
Lynn Pinette.
And Anne Pinette.
Is it not Pinetti?
Pinette?
Oh my God! I don't know now. I wouldn't. Now I don't know.
Because I thought it was an Italian name.
It could be.
Must be.
I don't know.
Or French.
We'll soon find out.
I knew.
This.
But
I don't think Ian would be afraid to say, "You got my name wrong, you idiot."
Yeah, maybe she'll write in.
Forgive me for
Anna.
interrupting.
It's
rude. But go ahead.
But so I'm teaching and sort of backstage cooking, and I taught a young guy was coming to my kind of regular classes, and he told me about his uncle. He was obviously in his evangelical phase, this guy, because his uncle, he'd said was facing a cancer diagnosis, and he's been like, I've been on at him that he's got to try this practice, but he wants to do it at home because of the treatment, and also he's a member of Parliament, and And so I go off
An MP.
and I start teaching Nick in his house. And actually, I should say, his cancer had been discovered really early,
Good.
and it was not the cancer itself that was going to make him very, very unwell. It was the treatment. He had to have this absolutely brutal form of chemotherapy, and it involved them taking his bone marrow off at the beginning of the treatment, some of his own bone marrow, so he could have that transplanted back. It was going to lay waste to his immune system. He really went through the ringer. We started off just. I said, we'll just get the practices. We'll do the practice, as kind of regular as we can to begin with, and then when it became shorter and shorter, and a lot more about sort of just breathing and that kind of thing. He disappeared before my eyes, all his hair fell out, and then he comes back to being the Nick that I met at the beginning again. I mean, he really licked it and bounced back. And then he says to me, so look, I'm going back to work. I can't skive off anymore. I'm going back to the office, and I want my lot doing this. I want my staff to do this too, because I think it's just saved my ass, and so I said, I got so used to Nick being at home and that I kind of had forgotten what he told me he did at the beginning, that he was hippie.
Right.
And we'd had a lot of jokes have been made about it, because I think I remember my first sort of time teaching him, he's like, go on then. So I got to ask, because he's a conservative politician. He was a housing minister, I think, at the time that he got unwell. And he was part of David Cameron's government.
Right.
And I said to him, come on, Nick, what do you reckon? I'm a gay yoga teacher from Peckham. It's and he said,
No, but you used to write for the Torygraph, mate.
I
was
did
your
write for the
parents are
Torygraph.
posh. You're sure to be a conservative.
I had many misgivings about taking that gig, actually. I thought, blimey. And I know why I was given that gig.
You're not a Guardian reader, are you?
I am, of course I am. Yeah.
Of course you are.
Brawny
gay, Yeah.
Do you know about that name, the Gourmet?
What were your misgivings about taking it?
Oh, the Daily Telegraph employed me as a cookery columnist for about
Because the
a
Daily
couple of
Telegraph is a Tory, is what
Got
the
it.
Tories read. And
Okay.
if the Guardian
so
is
they call it the Torygraph.
if the Guardian is the left wing broadsheet, the Daily Torygraph is the rightist of the right wing one.
Got it.
I had some interesting encounters with the readership of that. One time, I met this amazing baker, a guy called Richard Bertonet. He's a Breton living in Bath in England, and he had this beautiful cookery school, and they'd sent me there. I would go on these different assignments for them, and so they send me off to do cookery school with Richard Bertonet, master and baker, and because I'll come back and be able to tell the great and the good people that they can do this course with him and make this beautiful bread. And I said, Richard is a Frenchman. His working method with the dough and that is very precise. And let me tell you, this is much easier to follow these recipes if you go metric and don't try and do pounds and ounces because there's too many fractions. Use the grams and the milliliters, and I get this hate mail.
And
then
then like people
Telegraph to be told to work in metric.
To go metric?
people were burnt with pitchforks outside of the Daily Telegraph.
Luckily for me,
with their St. Edward's flags, and they were burning you in effigy.
Luckily for me, this is many years before my column would have been tweeted to the furious of Cirencester. It was
Yeah, they had to actually write in a complaint letter at
They
that
actually
point.
had to write an email or a letter. Anyway, I used to say to Nick, "You're so nice. How come you're a Tory?" Because he was an absolute sweetheart. He's a sweetheart.
Yeah.
And so I go, in I go to the Houses of Parliament because I'd said, "So remind me, where's the office?" And he was like, "Duh."
It's at Parliament.
Of course, yeah. Westminster.
Parliament.
Which was quite strange. I did it for 3 years. 3 years teaching them every
Wow.
Tuesday. When they were, and it was very come and go. they were hilarious. There was a nice mix of ages, but of course they had a schedule which I found very familiar. You know, some of the debates and things that rage into the small hours in the morning in the house. They can be called in and out for all sorts of business any time of day. It was patterns that I recognized. But added to that, they were the most incredibly argumentative people I'd ever taught. Everything seemed to be debated. Like Nick would be saying, "So there's another jump. I mean, really, another jump back, another. Why? What? I know you say it's to keep me warm. I'm already warm. The room is warm. You know." And I was like, "Oh, is this this is what it's like to teach parliamentarians? Everything has to be justified. You know."
Yes, everything
Mr.
does
Speaker,
have to be justified.
will the right honourable gentleman stop asking silly questions and do his jump backs?
Every twopence has to be accounted for.
That's so
right.
funny.
And in
they're trained in
2019
debate, so
well,
they're trained in debate.
Yeah, 2019 is one of Sharat's visits to London, and Hamish says, you know, anybody. It's always really nice to give him things to do, you know, in the daytime. And I'd said, "Oh, well, Nick has asked, would he like to come and see?" Nick is very taken with the idea of our guru coming over from India, and says, "Would he like a tour of the house?" And you know, Nick would love to meet him. I think Nick didn't feel up to doing the big you know, he was still coming out of the tail end of his recovery. So we did that. Sharat came, met Nick and the others, and had a tour of the House of Commons.
Amazing.
Watched a little bit of a debate, and then we had this fantastic sort of tea and biscuits chat. And that's when they said to him, actually, they said, "Has Tom told you how disobedient we are? You know, we always we don't do anything he says." And it was really sweet. And then, you know how every now and again, I remember just walking down this corridor with Sharat, and it'd already been a great day. It couldn't have got any better. And he just turned to me and he said, "Look," he said, "let me tell you something." He said, "I know they're teasing you, but given their ages and the crazy schedule," he said, "don't worry about the jump backs and all that kind of thing." He's like, "But make sure," he said, "make sure they're doing this posture, this posture, this posture." Baddha Konasana, he said, Upavishta Konasana, Supta Baddha Gustasana. I mean, these were postures at the end of the series where I was never going to get them if they were, you know, they were rebelling over the jump back between Paschimottanasana and Purvatanasana. He said, "Yeah, just give them this sequence. It'll really help, and especially help Nick because." And I was like, wow. You know, when he does that too,
That's phenomenal.
You're never sure how much how much of a good time he's having, and it was like obviously I think he had a nice day that day, and he and Nick really hit it off. But this advice was great.
When we were in class together once in I think 2010, was it the special class?
Yeah.
And he said to all of us in the room, with all you know, third series strivers, all of us. And he said, you know, when you're teaching headstand, you know, it's okay. Just tell them they can use the wall.
Oh, because it's, yeah.
And it was like a bomb had gone off in the room. Like, what?
But they used to do that in Lakshmipuram. They would put people up against the wall. And even like learning dropbacks, they put them up against the wall. So
And
the
especially
afternoon classes
if
doing all
someone's
kinds of stuff.
over 50, isn't that right? I remember Hamish saying, you know, once someone's over 50, you've got to get them upside down. You need like less asanas, more headstand.
yeah.
So
I think
noticed
it's so
this
nice
sequence
to
of
like
Sharat.
also hear your experience. That's like Sharat was saying, that it doesn't have to be so rigid,
No.
and it really depends on the student that's in front of you.
I realized this sequence afterwards because it was around that time that I think that he had the book Ageless out. There's this lovely chapter
Yeah.
about
Oh,
asana
right.
in there, and he says 10 asana are all you need. That list is pretty much what he said to me that day. It's got all those asanas in
that's
it.
the list.
And it's it's a lovely list of postures.
Yeah.
And I switched. I mean, I thought, you know, if he's recommending it, let's try it. and that became their sequence. We do pretty much all of the standing postures, so not just the 10, because out of the standing poses, there's only Trikonasana and Utkatasana, Virabhadrasana, and Utthita Palingashtasana. Interestingly, the Utthita Hasta comes, or that pose comes twice in the list as Utthita Hasta and Supta Palingashtasana. That struck me.
Down.
So it's obviously a cardinal kind of set of moves and positions.
Yeah.
I know it's meant to, Supta Palingashtasana is meant to unknot the grantees.
I always feel like it's just like a nice way to like open your hips while you're lying down.
To lie down. Yeah. So I then that's when I began to talk to Jenny Wilkinson about, I'm still in my every chef must have yoga kind of phase, and so we started talking about getting this workshop together where I would and it would base it on that list of asanas, base it on a sequence much more like that one than the version of the primary series we'd been doing, just because it's a nice in, and then of course just as we scheduled it for March 2020.
Oh no.
And so,
God. Yeah.
The world shut down.
The world shut down.
in the end, I took it online, and I had
wrist-
through the first lockdown, I had a lovely group of cooks just joining me, and we do that sequence and
on Zoom.
Yeah, just on Zoom, like the rest of the world.
That's amazing.
One of the articles I remember reading at that time was now that this has happened and it's devastated the restaurant industry, people are talking about coming back. The last thing we'd want to do is come back the way it was, because the way it was broken. For human beings to be chefs is a broken system. Do you agree with that? Do you think that it's already happened? It's already gone back the way it was?
No, I don't think it's gone back the way it was. It does seem to be a thriving scene again at the moment, and it is much changed. It seems more humane. Like I think to get people when as we first came out of the lockdowns, there were a lot of people who had decided not to go back into hospitality. So it was the short staffing crisis was huge thing, and only made worse by Brexit, because now you suddenly had a whole cohort of people who couldn't necessarily come to London and do jobs that they were really brilliant at, in a completely uncomplicated way, without the freedom of movement. That became much more of an undertaking and wasn't that attractive to people. I think, ironically, the stuff that I'd wanted to start talking about before the pandemic, a lot of it, maybe the pandemic almost forced those issues to be addressed. So I think if you want to be in the game now, you can demand more humane working hours. There's a lot more enticing pay packets and conditions around than there used to be. I had, funnily enough, long before COVID got blamed, and Brexit got blamed for a crisis that actually I had seen emerging. Like that, the idea of sort of the train coming down the track in slow motion, and that was that it wasn't that the job had got any worse. It's never going to be everybody's cup of tea, that kind of intense lifestyle. It was the opportunities that job had presented me with in my early 20s had changed and had diminished. Just all this lovely kind of charging around London on my bike as a young man, working not even as a head chef yet, working in young restaurants. I mean, I was able to buy myself a little flat in Peckham,
right,
for peanuts. I mean, it was a really rundown flat. I had to do it up. But years later, I'm paying people in my little restaurant, paying them a lot more than I ever earned when I was their age, and they're commuting to the ends of the metropolitan lines, and they're out on the fringes of the city, because that's as close as they can get a look into the sort of the rental market, let alone buying themselves a flat half an hour's bike ride away.
Yeah.
It struck me, and that was because of the craziness of the housing market in London. And ultimately, actually, that was what was our exit from Great Queen Street. That little street slowly but surely began to become gentrified, as all things must. And the landlord turned around and said, I got to look at everybody's rents again. And when they announced the figure that they were going to need, we were like, that can't be us.
That's it.
Yeah. In one way, it was nice because we went out on a high. We didn't go bust or anything. We just had to say, like, we're not going to take this business from the black into the red. We'll stop. We'll call it a day.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that made us able to take that decision actually was the understanding that perhaps the game was really, really changing.
Another parallel between cooking and Ashtanga that's interesting here is that this has happened to me several times where I've been what it gentrified out of a job in Ashtanga Yoga, where I've found an opportunity where I could double my income, or I found an opportunity where I can no longer pay the rents in this place and I need to move on. And the students, or in the restaurant world, you might say your regulars, are left there like just completely bereft. Like we've lost our restaurant that we go to on Monday nights. We lost our restaurant we go to on Thursday nights. We've lost our practice. We lost our teacher. And no other teacher's good enough because they didn't have the right, all of the bits and bobs that this teacher had.
Didn't have that chemistry.
Yeah, and I imagine that must be the same in the restaurant world, where it really is kind of terrible for your community.
Central London now is dominated a lot by chains, Luckily, actually, it's naughty if I don't qualify that by saying actually it was an independent that bought the remainder of our lease off us, so it did another one-off went in there. But I was fairly convinced that it was going to be a chain that was going to bite our hand off for our little site.
Right.
Yeah, there has been a homogenization of the centre of town, but again, I think in cooking, for example, there's always been change. The centre, the CBD, call it if you like, the central business sort of district of London. There has been a sort of move out to the boroughs, and we now have these fantastic diverse eating and drinking scenes in boroughs like this one. It has moved out to the other zones, to zones sort of 2 and 3.
But that's how you know you're being gentrified, is when the gays move in. That's the first stop of gentrification. Yeah.
Yeah. The gays in Pret-a-Manger. Or any other one of those kind of, yeah. I think, capitals need to be changing, don't they?
It's what happens.
It's interesting because I noticed a similar trend even with yoga, even a worse trend with yoga and teaching yoga when I kind of first started teaching back in 2001. You could get paid a very low cost for a class would be about $35 for an hour. That's like on the low end. And like a good price would be about $50 an hour. If you're a good teacher, you're kind of making that kind of money. And I think since then, the average that yoga teachers are making is actually like maybe half of that.
Yeah.
like a not a great class, you're making $15 an hour. And like if you're a good teacher, then maybe you can pull off 40, And so it's almost like the pay's gone down as a yoga teacher because the market all of a sudden got flooded with yoga teachers.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's barely economical to like run a yoga I mean, it's barely economical to be a yoga teacher. You really need another job almost at this point, unless you have like a big following or have created an online business of some sort, or
Even the folks who have books are no longer cutting it.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think this was something you also noticed, even like running a Mysore program. Like after COVID, London used to be kind of an Ashtanga Yoga mecca, and running a Mysore program was like there were so many actually, so many Mysore programs.
Yes,
and I think that's changed a lot too recently, hasn't it?
It has definitely changed. I'd say there are probably less than there were when I first started practicing.
Right.
I think that is partly because a lot of the commercial, again, the move out. Well, the move the move away from the central business districts out into the sort of more local communities that's happened on the dining scene. I think has also happened on the yoga scene here, and the places that really struggled to bounce back from the pandemic were the larger studios like Tri Yoga, the branches of most of which were in kind of commuter belt. Largely their customer was largely people going to work, either on the way into work or on the way back out from work. And now these little high street places, they're catering for people who are doing a lot of work from home, or have just decided that they're going to support their sort of local communities. But I think again, they tend to be quite sort of small spaces, and it is tough for those places to make money out of Mysore. It requires certainly. I know that the building where my little program is, I rely on their sort of patience with the fact that I'm in a small room. I can take about 12 to 14 people in it in one pop, and I've got 3 hours. In that time, they could probably fill that room twice over if they chucked in a vinyasa flow or another bar class. They've got bar, and they've got vinyasa flow and rocket and all the things that are kind of easier to promote, easier to attract.
Yeah.
Someone said easier to get bums on mats.
Buns on mats.
Buns on mats.
And so it takes a brave studio these days to add Mysore to the roster, doesn't it? Hats off to those that are still doing it, but the sad thing is that list is diminishing all the time. Added to which,
it's tough because
it's a tough gig, isn't it? I mean, in Tri Yoga's case,
as a teacher,
if they lost a teacher, it got to the point a couple of years ago where they just couldn't find another person to go and teach Mysore in that room, so they stopped doing Ashtanga Yoga.
Instead of a crowd of 10 people lining up to do it, there was none.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think that also is because, it requires a certain skill set, but also I think a lot of the big studio chains, sometimes the smaller studios are better for supporting Mysore because they actually believe in the teacher and it's about relationships and they believe in that kind of practice and teaching. But sometimes with the bigger studios, they're like, okay, well, I'm going to pay you're a Mysore teacher, come in for 3 hours and teach Mysore and we'll give you $50.
Yeah.
And you're like, what?
It's $50. I can't live off this.
I can't live off $50, and it's hard labor too for your body. It's hard work. It's very concentrated, focused work.
Then do Mysore for 8 hours and try and make 100 quid, and then you can live off of it. That's a proper job.
And the other thing is as well, the other added to that is that the very nature of those multidiscipline studios doesn't really encourage commitment, and what you need for a Mysore program to thrive is that community building and commitment. Whereas if you've got just a whole array of other classes to sort of draw people's eye away from your own, it's very, very difficult to sort of find your feet in that situation, I think.
Yeah, it's true. It doesn't, you're right, it doesn't thrive so much. A traditional Ashtanga Yoga Mysore program doesn't thrive so much in that kind of like very multidisciplinary studio
Absolutely.
because of it's just a very different mentality of student that's coming to the studio by nature.
Yeah.
But saying that, I did have one of those in Taiwan where I was in a multidisciplinary, multi-storied studio, and it was posh, and they had little aunties who would run around and clean your mats for you, and then they had, big spa in the back. And I developed a program that had 70 students a day, and it reached a zenith. And then I was able to observe that the reason I had 70 was because it was so much a fad. And I was riding this wave of faddishness that people, they would, in Taiwan, is very obsessed with fads. And so they when the donut shop came up,
Dunkin' Donuts?
the new one
Robin?
after Dunkin' Donuts,
Not Krispy Kreme.
it was like the new Krispy Kreme.
Krispy
When Krispy Kreme came to Taiwan, they lined up 300 people around the block to go to Krispy Kreme. And I didn't put it together that they were doing the same thing to me. I just thought I was very good. And then I just as I was leaving, I just saw that the fad was going to
Hot
yoga or anusara, and they were just starting to drift and break away. And it would have been really kind of, it would have been I would have had a psychic break, I'm sure, if I had continued, watching my entire ego kind of walk out the room.
You left at the high point.
I
You should have
did.
got sponsored by Krispy Kreme, or like free Krispy Kreme with every. And don't worry, you'll still be able to do Manchester D.
The D stands for donut.
I was very much encouraging anorexia at that time, just like any other responsible teacher. But we, unless we're going to go into part three,
I think we should close. But tell everyone where they can find you, Tom. What are you up to these days?
So I'm teaching a little Mysore program down here in southeast London, in East Dulwich on the border with Peckham. Called Oru Space is the name of the building. It's a beautiful co-working space with a vegetarian cafe, and very luckily for me, they gave me this room and said, give us some Mysore. So I'm there on weekday mornings. I still assist Hamish at Ashtanga Yoga London, and I teach there 1 or 2 evenings a week at his Charlotte. And then just lately, just kind of doing my own thing with cooking. I run workshops based around helping people understand seasonal cooking and eating. And I cook for yoga retreats, which I really love doing, with an emphasis on, guarantee the menu is free from all those shenanigans and just...
highly processed.
Yeah, exactly. I call it old school now, because I'm old. I'm 55 this year. Old school veggie.
Old school veg.
Real vegetables. No pea protein.
For real people.
Yeah. Real vegetables for real people, yeah. And horseradish, like ugly vegetables.
And horseradish.
I know exactly where I'm going to shove that. Right down me gob. That's it.
Do it in a well-ventilated space, because otherwise you'll cry.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been lovely.
Much.
You were a delight. We got 2 shows out of this. You're so good.
2 shows of lots of nonsense.
Lots of nonsense.
It's beautiful.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Wasn't it fun? I loved it. Oh my gosh, so good. If you didn't know, we have a open community, Finding Harmony community. It's hosted over on Mighty Networks, and I want to invite you to join. It is a place where we have discussions. You can also practice with me once a month, some pranayama, some breath work practices. We have challenges and meditation groups and conversations about the podcast. You can also make suggestions for guests that you would like us to interview, as well as just talk about what you're learning or what you're noticing. not just in the podcast, but in your practice, in your life. It's a beautiful online community, and I'm curating it on Mighty Networks, and it's open for all of our listeners, so that's you. I hope that you come on over and join us. It's a great group of human beings, heart-centered humans that are all interested in spiritual practices, Ashtanga Yoga, coaching, personal development, growth, meditation, breath work. We're really diving into how to deepen our spiritual practice beyond just the obvious and infuse our spiritual practice into everyday life. How we can find harmony within ourselves, within our lives, and bring it out into the world. So I would love for you to join my Finding Harmony community. You'll find the link in our show notes here and also in my bio on Instagram. I can't wait to welcome you in and get to know you more and have you be a part of this great group of human beings who are all finding harmony in different ways within themselves and within the world. That's it. We've concluded another episode of the Finding Harmony podcast. I just want to thank you so much for doing the work that changes the world, starting with yourself. It truly does make a huge difference. Please make sure you have your automatic downloads turned on wherever you listen so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. I have so much more magic I can't wait to share with you. Lastly, if you're on Instagram, I love connecting and hearing from you. So come on over and say hello at Finding Harmony Podcast. And you can also come say hello to me personally at Harmony Slater Official. Thank you again for being here. I cannot wait to share more with you in our next episode.